Hey there, Cassidy, and welcome to the show. You're actually the first guest we've had on since season 1.
Oh, wow.
Kind of hard to get these things coordinated, and
Yeah.
your appearance was no different.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Hey, well, thanks for having me. Yeah,
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to sit down with us. I really, really appreciate that.
for sure. Yeah.
So to avoid accusations of doxing, I didn't go too far back, but to get to know you a little bit more, I took a look at your resume or CV for everybody else around the world, right? And it spans a lot of places that folks in the Linux community would know. System 76
Yes.
as a
So I was originally hired as a web developer and then moved into doing a UX architect. So a little bit of development and then UX.
and elementryOS as the chief experience officer.
Yep. Yep. Helped co-found Elementary Inc. and did that for a long time. Since before it was even a company, I was contributing to Elementary.
Yes, I'd followed you for quite a long time because the work that you and Danny put into elementaryOS has always kind of captured the artistic side of what I like about a desktop.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Now, more currently, Endless OS, bridging the gap between engineers and people that deploy the hardware and software that Endless creates.
Yeah. Exactly.
Has the user experience always been your focus?
Yeah. I think it's one of those like. I hear this from a lot of different people in different professions of like you looking back, you can see as a kid or in maybe in junior high school, like how it should be obvious in retrospect of like as a kid, I liked to design like pretend menus for like so I'm the youngest sibling. I'm the youngest of my siblings. So I would say it's CJ's Cafe, and I would like have a little menu and I design it, and then like I was all about like, oh well, you have to come in the room here and you start here, and then I like make you a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or whatever it was. And like looking back, it's like, oh, I was doing like UX design for like a pretend restaurant as a kid, and then like I think it became more formal, much more formal in college when I went to university and studied interactive digital studies, and then I had a UX internship, which was amazing to actually like dive full in. So I was kind of doing like web development as like, oh well, that's what I have to do, and I use computers, and so that that's how I'll make money. And then over the years, like I shifted more and more into doing actual UX design and UX architecture.
That is really cool. What is it about that type of design that kind of calls to you?
I love like having an idea and like turning it into something, a product or a physical object or a digital object. Like having an idea to solve a problem specifically. So I almost think of it like I recently got a 3D printer, and it's the same kind of thing, but in the physical world when you're like, oh, I
Yeah.
have this idea and I want like I have a if only I had this physical object that was this size and shape, it would solve this problem. It's the same thing with digital UX. So you see something and this could be better. How can this be better? And you have to really understand the problem before you can solve the problem. Like you can't just say, well, clearly the solution is this and just do it. You have to actually understand what the actual problem is and then solve it. So like I've always loved that problem solving and creating, like turning things from an idea into something real. So it's just kind of a combination of all those things.
Yeah, and digging into the history of Endless OS, I think one recurring theme is you put boots on ground and figure out what people actually need out of an operating system, and then
Yeah.
you make those changes so that there's the least amount of friction to getting the job done.
Yeah, and I think that's what's like really like refreshing and kind of beautiful about Endless is we're not really, I guess it's a double-edged sword. I'll get back to that. But like we're not really in the Linux bubble in a lot of ways. Like
Right.
our users generally are not Linux users or like aren't what you think of as a Linux user. And so like in a way it's really freeing because you don't have to think about, well, what are the Linux nerds going to go talk about on Reddit, when we make this decision. It's like, no, what is going to solve the user's problems, and let's just do it. And then we actually, do user testing and field studies and like look at people in the field doing things and just solve those problems. The double-edged sword is like we do a lot of work within the Linux community that people don't realize we're doing. So behind the scenes, I don't want to take credit for like everything that going on in like GNOME and FlatHub and Flatpak worlds, but today there was a really interesting announcement. on
Yes.
FlatHub and like the future of FlatHub. And you'll notice it was authored by Rob McQueen, who's the CEO of endlessOS Foundation and also a
Yes.
major contributor to Flatpak or FlatHub.
Yeah. And he's on the GNOME Foundation.
And he's on the GNOME. He's the president of the GNOME board. Yeah. So it's like, we kind of have fingers in lots of different places in the open desktop space. And again, it's not like this like nefarious controlling behind the scenes thing. It's like we care desperately about making a good product and for these thousands of people out there in the world using it. And so we're going to contribute upstream where it makes sense, where we can. And it makes it a better product, not just for us. It makes the impact wider than we could have as our own organization.
Exactly.
If we can make GNOME better and FlatHub better, like it just makes it better for everybody.
Yes, that was actually the last article or the last thing that we were going to say about the history. Is that particular article is $100,000 to for like legal purposes and just keeping FlatHub up and running day after day after day. I forgot the figure, but it was in the terabytes or something, or probably it was massive. 88.3.
88, yeah.
Wow.
It's per day, right?
Yes.
It's like,
yes.
Yeah.
So you think about it, that's app updates, that's platform updates, runtime updates that are going out to effectively every user using Flatpak, because most people who use Flatpak use FlatHub.
Right.
Anytime you get an update, especially if you have auto updates, like those have to come from a server somewhere, and those are coming from FlatHub servers. And it's the CDN, so thanks to everyone who has sponsored us there, and like, yeah, it's incredible. But that, like, to talking about that, $100,000 from Endless Network, it's kind of this interesting like structure of organizations. So Endless Network is basically the umbrella organization for the endlessOS Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So Endless Network also has other initiatives like teaching kids to code via games with something called Endless Studios. So that's not directly part of what endlessOS Foundation does, but we work with the other Endless people, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of this cool structure because we can really focus in at the endlessOS Foundation on solving really specific problems. So a big thing we do is bridging the digital divide through educational tools. So endlessOS comes with a ton of offline capable content and stuff that a student can like use for self-guided learning. The idea being you can put this computer in front of a kid with no internet. It's a safe environment, but there's tons of stuff to do and learn and figure out and grow and develop all offline.
I tried to click on everything. You can't.
You can't get through it all.
There's not enough time in even a month to get through all of that stuff. I played a lot with Hack, which teaches you. I think there's like 4 or 5 different categories of stuff, like operating system knowledge, coding knowledge, and each of the people in Hack will kind of take you on a learning journey of here are the things that you need to know. And it's all free. I think originally it wasn't, but it's all free now.
Yeah, it's all free and it's included on endlessOS. And I haven't even gone through everything you can go through on that stuff. It's like, it is mind-boggling how much.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, even thinking about like, we have effectively snapshots of Wikipedia that are offline.
Yep.
And like, can you imagine all of Wikipedia and just like, how much time you can waste just sitting on Wikipedia, right? It's like, what if that was all on your hard drive? Like,
exactly.
But the idea being, you totally can just, I came back from an on-site visit in the rural U.S. and these students don't have internet at home.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea being like, you could take this computer from home, whether it was from your school or another organization, and like, even though you don't have internet, we think broadband's a solved problem even here in the U.S. It's like, no,
it's not.
It's not. But you can bring that device and those learning materials home, and it just like unlocks so much capability. Even though it's not like curriculum that's dictated by the school district or anything. It's just like knowledge. It's like having an entire library on your hard drive just there for you, and it's so useful.
I got very big Microsoft Encarta vibes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Back in the early 90s, I had Microsoft Encarta. Pop that disc in. I think there were like 4 or 8, or there was a bunch. And, I mean, everything you would click on was just, it was enthralling for me as a kid because it was a computer, and I loved computers.
Put a bunch of knowledge and information in front of somebody, and they can really learn a lot.
Well, and
Yep.
even if it's not their primary, learning tool, it is definitely a reference for them, and it's something they can grow from. So, yeah.
Well, when it doesn't have any internet, you don't have to worry about YouTube being a distraction. So maybe that's the
Yeah.
that's the school computer.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and that's actually something that's cool is like, we've worked on, because not some people do have internet at home, and we still want Endless OS to be useful to them. So we've developed and shipped parental controls features in the OS, and those are actually upstreamed into GNOME now. So like if you have a GNOME, any modern GNOME distro, you have parental controls there. That was developed by Endless for Endless OS, and we're like, let's not keep that to ourselves. Like, let's give that out. That there's other people using other distros that run GNOME that could totally benefit from this. So that's like, that's kind of our model that we try to do is, obviously we're solving a problem that we have found out in the world, and we're shipping an OS because that's the easiest way to like directly solve problems. But it doesn't mean we have to hold all that to ourselves. We definitely want, basically we're successful if everybody else can solve the same problems we're solving, then we see ourselves as being successful.
Yep, 100%. And I really enjoy the way that that Endless has gone about that. It's not keeping it to yourself. It's giving back to the wider community, not just in code, but in money as well, as we saw. Endless seems to me to be kind of the example to look up to as how you should behave as a open source or a Linux first kind of company. It's refreshing to see.
It's refreshing. Yeah, it's refreshing to like be involved in that, and it's always nice to hear when other people like see that, because I think for a long time, Endless has been doing that. Like for a decade, Endless has been doing that behind the scenes, and kind of nobody knew about it. So it's kind of fun to be like, hey, we're on a podcast to like tell the world like what we're doing. And I think people will hear a lot more of Endless too as we continue to work on, especially UX testing on GNOME. Some of like the offline or disconnected technology that we can do. Like there's lots of initiatives throughout GNOME that are really interesting that we're definitely going to be involved in.
Yeah, I think the news cycle really caught up with Endless 5.
Yeah, I think part of that too is up until Endless OS 5, the desktop was pretty different from upstream GNOME. So we shipped like a taskbar type thing at the bottom of the screen. The grid of apps on the home screen, and like when you first looked at it, you might not even know that it was based on GNOME. Whereas, so part of our work for the GNOME 40 cycle, now it's like 4 versions ago in GNOME, but part of the work that Endless did for the GNOME 40 cycle is that we commissioned some user testing, and then also had some of our designers and developers like working with the GNOME team on identifying problems with the current GNOME design. And so then with GNOME 40, there was that big redesign of the desktop, and it, like, for such a big redesign, it was received really well by most people, which is really cool. And again, don't want to take like sole credit, like, and there were lots of people, there were people from Purism and people from just the GNOME community working on it, but like a lot of that was from Endless's involvement in the user testing side. And so now you'll notice with Endless OS 5, it's much closer to the GNOME 40 and beyond look. Like
it is.
There's still like a couple kind of fundamental differences, but we're working over time to say, okay, can we solve this upstream in GNOME, and then maybe we can drop it from our custom shell.
Well, I've noticed a couple of things too. Like you mentioned it even, the grid style, right there greets you basically. And that is not what you would normally get in the GNOME environment. And
right.
I would say that experience is probably for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, there's some of it's a difference of like target user.
Right.
Something we constantly hear from the Endless side with our users is the more like a smartphone it can be, the better it is, the easier it is for them to use. And that's two-sided as well. Like, you don't want to dumb down the desktop so much that it's not useful. So our approach has been, make it, when you first get on the computer, make it look like, oh yeah, that's a computer, or that's like my smartphone. I know how to use it. But then also demonstrate, hey, there are reasons that a real computer is much more powerful than a smartphone, or even something like a Chromebook, where you can have real apps that are real productivity apps, that you have real window management, all of these things that you kind of ease the user into, but you got to catch them first with that, like, it's as easy to use as your iPhone or your Android phone.
That's huge when you first log in, hitting you with the apps. That really does give that vibe. I noticed you were talking about apps that really only kind of work on a desktop, and I realized that really quickly when I clicked on the budget app thing. That's more of a launcher that takes you into templates that are that open up in LibreOffice.
Yeah, the LibreOffice. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there was a resume builder too that was like the same sort of thing. Yeah.
One of the cool stories from Endless is we have a contractor who actually used Endless OS before he started working for us, and he built his resume for applying to Endless is in the resume builder on Endless OS. So it's just like
nice.
It's always cool to be like, hey, it's actually like not only is it used in the wild, like we knew that people were using it in the wild, but like we saw the end result of that. It's like, oh, cool. That's really cool.
Was that a bit of a HR hack? Like if you use the resume builder, it gets to the top of the
the list. Yeah. I don't think so. I don't think we even knew that he had used that app until he had started it. He's like, oh yeah, I totally just built it in the resume builder. It's like, oh, well, that's awesome.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
So I had another question because Endless is different. It's based on Debian, but loosely, I guess you could say, because Endless uses something called OS tree.
Yeah.
Why is that so important to the reliability of Endless?
Yeah. So it's another one of those fun things that people don't realize. I think is like we were, I think, the first, if not among the very first, like
I was
actual
wondering
production
the same. Yeah.
image-based operating system, Linux-based operating systems that were image-based. We made an early bet on OS tree, and then similarly with Flatpak.
That worked out well.
Yeah, right. And we saw that a real problem, with not just Linux, but really any operating system is it needs to be rock solid, reliable, and especially in environments where you don't have reliable internet. If you download a 20 gigabyte update to your OS and it stops 3/4 of the way through and you pay per megabyte, like that is catastrophic. Like,
yes.
And so we needed to make sure it was as bulletproof as possible, as reliable as possible. And OS Tree solves that for us. It does an image-based update. So, but under the hood, like on the server side where we build it, it's a Debian operating system with Debian packages, and we say, okay, pull in the latest Debian version straight from Debian. But then it basically packages it up as an OS Tree image. It says, okay, here's the version the user's on, and here's the new version. What's the diff between the two? And then it only downloads the diff. And then if it fails for any reason, it just doesn't matter. It can resume where it was, or at least if they don't reboot into a broken system.
Right.
And then when it is finished downloading, all you have to do is reboot the computer. And it's actually really similar to how like Android on a Pixel works these days. I think there's a few other devices, but where it does like the A/B partition sort of thing. If the update's successful and then you reboot, if you like successfully boot up, then you're good. If for some unforeseen reason it wouldn't boot up, it would just automatically boot back into your previous version.
Yep.
So it's really robust in that way. And so when you have people, who aren't tech savvy people, when you have people who aren't connected to the internet, so they couldn't really connect to us and say that they need help, and we have people who are in even like remote places in the world where there's not reliable electricity, let alone internet. It's hard to get a person on the ground to help them out.
Yeah.
So we have deployments in, various places in Africa and Asia and South America and like fairly remote places where there's just no way to get a human on the ground reliably. So
yeah, and I imagine finding someone with an Endless key in their pocket probably pretty hard down there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And luckily we do work with some organizations that have great like tech people who are on the ground and can do that sort of work if needed. But really it needs to be. That's the big reason behind it. Is it needs to be as reliable as possible for people who just need it to work. More like an appliance. You just turn it on and it works.
Yes.
And you turn it off when you're done.
Yep.
And it's funny because it's like. So several of the things I feel like I've said are things that would be controversial in the Linux desktop space, but like at the same time, it's all open source and it's your system, and you can get into that operating system and do things. Like we ship a terminal out of the box, even though it's like relatively like locked down for reliability reasons. So it's funny. It's because it's like, oh, I don't want my Linux computer to be an appliance. That's the TiVoization of Linux, right? Is like,
Right.
but it's distinct from that. It's hard to like separate it. It has to be as reliable as an appliance like that, but also fundamentally, it's all open source and you still own your computer and your device.
Right. And I know Endless has been compared to set-top boxes a whole heck of a lot. So yeah, if they break, they're gonna stay broken, and this is the way around that.
Like if the software on your computer doesn't boot and you have never used a computer before, as far as you're concerned, that computer is broken and it's garbage. Like,
Exactly.
Whereas as a technical user, it's like, oh, well, I could maybe reflash the OS or whatever. It's like, no, if it doesn't boot up every time when you hit that power button, it may as well be a piece of garbage, and it has to be reliable. But it's also like a really cool time in the desktop space to have that sort of like image-based OS, because we have technologies like Flatpak that you can get pretty much any app these days on top of your OS and it just works. But also things like Toolbox. So Fedora Silverblue, I'm not sure if it originated within the Fedora world or where it came from exactly, but Toolbox is amazing. I use it on my Endless OS machine for development, so I can actually pull down the latest, Fedora 37 image, and in my terminal on the Endless OS, I have a Fedora Toolbox, and I can build things with the latest GNOME and GTK stuff, but it's on Endless OS. So like, this whole container, I'm not like super familiar with like Kubernetes and Docker and like all those things.
Sure.
But how we've gotten it onto the desktop where you can just say, go into a toolbox, and now I'm in a wide open Fedora environment or Debian or whatever. It makes it really powerful to have that like super stable baseline OS with all your developer tools on top.
Yep, absolutely. And so it seems to me that Endless OS has been this sleeper distro that has been driving overarching decisions in the Linux community for the longest time. But now we're watching it proliferate now too.
Yeah,
we're watching OS
absolutely.
tree happen everywhere. And yeah, Wayland is as well.
They were seeing that atomic style system in other places too, and becoming like the consumer, put it in the consumer's hands so they don't have to worry about it with things like the Steam Deck and stuff.
Yeah, and Endless consumers have been on OS tree for a while, so it's pretty tested.
I always laugh when I hear discussions of people, on forums or on Reddit or wherever it is, saying like, oh, well, it's nice for this theoretical experimental thing like Fedora Silverblue, but you could never ship it. It's too early. And it's like, we've been shipping it for how many years now? And the reason we shipped it is because it's more reliable. It's more rock solid. So
exactly,
it's always fun to hear outside perspectives.
I think some folks just have this. I need to be able to touch every single file on my system, and there is no compromise, which is I think why you get this aversion to OS tree. But I'm all for it. The machine that I'm on right now, I don't need it to change like ever. And if I do run updates, I need it to continue to work afterwards. So where you have that A/B situation where if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it rolls me back. That's beautiful. That's all I need in a workstation like what I'm on right now. Are there any other things that just excite you about Endless in general, or about UX design coming up in the year, or maybe next couple of years?
Oh man, that's quite the broad question. Let's see. Let's pick it apart a little bit. So exciting things with Endless OS specifically. It's kind of adjacent to Endless OS, but it affects Endless OS, which is awesome. So I'm really thrilled to see all of the momentum behind FlatHub, and like, while I think it's extremely important that Flatpak as a technology is decentralized by its design, I think that's a key like piece of Flatpak. I think it's also extremely valuable to have a de facto, this is where you can get your apps. And so, on Endless OS, we ship FlatHub enabled out of the box and have for quite a while now. And so seeing, just having like over 2,000 apps now available on FlatHub, and having things like verified apps on FlatHub so you can know that the apps are coming from their actual developers. Like, that's really exciting to me. I think we're kind of at this like turning point a bit of like apps on Linux where, we've had honestly pretty pioneering things like Elementary App Center in the past. have it, like allowing people to get paid for their work,
Right.
paid apps. But it feels like we're at a point where it has ballooned to a scale that it hasn't been before. So
Yep.
that's really exciting to me. I'm really excited to see all of that work shipping later this year.
I agree. I like the verification thing is something super important to me
Yep.
because one of my stances is I don't care how the developer wants me to consume the software. I'm going to take it that way. If it's app image, that's fine. If it's Flatpak, if it's I don't care. But first party first. And when I can see a little check or something in FlatHub, that just makes my job of consuming software a little bit easier, and I really enjoy that.
Yeah, definitely. And it feels like this like promise that we've been on the cusp of for a long time is like finally becoming true of like, oh, you actually can get tons of apps from tons of different people on any Linux distro that you're on. Like it's really coming to a point where it has critical mass, which is really nice. I get kind of along with that or next to that is all of the work that's been going into GNOME on the design side of things is really exciting. As like maybe tooting my horn a little bit because I've been involved on the GNOME design team as well. But I'm still just like amazed. Like every GNOME update is like, oh, that's so much better. Like when I think like, oh, it's good enough. It's like, no, it's so much better every time. And things like the Edweda platform, like that really excites me to see the really rapid innovation we're getting on like the toolkit side of things. So we're getting animations and fluidity and adaptability in apps that we just haven't had before on the desktop. And they're really relatively easy to make those apps now. Things like GNOME Builder, like super awesome IDE. I never used to love IDEs. I thought they were way too complicated, but GNOME Builder kind of sold me on like, it was simple enough I could get used to it, but powerful enough that I really saw the value in having a full integrated environment.
Right.
And it's really easy to build GNOME apps in GNOME Builder. So like, I think all those pieces are coming together at the same time too. I think we're at this like really interesting crossroads moment in just like the Linux desktop in general.
Looking at Windows and where they ended up taking off was developers. That was the refrain from Steve Ballmer years and years ago. And after that stuff took root, having the IDE, having the support that a developer would need, then you saw an explosion of just absolutely everything anybody could possibly conceive. And I see parallels now with that, with GNOME Builder and GNOME and the ecosystem and Edweda and everything else, how it's coming together quite nicely.
Yeah, and I mean, you look then at maybe one of the next big computing kind of revolutions of like the smartphone, when it really blew up as far as just the usefulness of our smartphones was when, iOS, when it first came out, iPhone OS didn't have an app store at first.
Right.
When they had the app store where people could just really easily put their apps there, get them in front of users, like that's when that platform and the smartphone as we know it really blew up. Yeah, there's interesting parallels, I think, in both like focusing on developers' needs and then also how to actually get their apps in the hands of people.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a really, really exciting time. And then I think like underneath all that too is also this like image-based OS stuff, which we've been doing it in LSOS for a long time, but it's exciting to see like Fedora is like, hey, this Silverblue thing's pretty cool. Like this OS tree thing is pretty cool. And even Ubuntu is working. They've been working on snapping up like as much as they can of the OS and making an image-based OS, which whatever you think about Snap or whatever, but like the base idea makes a lot of sense to say, having a really rock solid image-based OS, ship your apps on top on a layer. Yeah, it's a good time to be in Linux, I think.
Yeah, it really is. I was excited for Snap Core and all of the Ubuntu core everything. But it never really made it to the desktop. And then when Snap came out, I was like, all right, cool. This is a piece of it. I like it. I'll use it. And I do. But I really would like to see what Ubuntu's answer to that would be. A full Snap desktop.
I think we will.
I'm excited for it. Whenever it decides to come out, it doesn't matter to me. I will love to try it.
I think you look at how much investment they're putting into Snap in the desktop right now. Like it, I think it's inevitable. We will have a Snap based desktop sooner or later.
Yep, definitely. And I would like to see. Let's see what OS Tree versus Snap can do. and
Yeah.
see
I mean,
who rolls me back faster. That's going to be the question.
hey, that's a good call. Yeah, yeah. And it's people get hung up on this technology versus that technology, and
Mhm.
it's hard for me because while I see a ton of value in joining forces and saying let's all just make this one thing, beautiful utopia, make it all better. There's also there's value in competition, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
I do think there are things about Snap that got better because of Flatpak, and I think there's things about Flatpak that got better because of Snap, and having a bit of healthy competition, I think, is always good. I think at some point, there's an inevitable okay, let's just join forces on whatever piece it is. I guess in Flatpak and Snap, we see that with the portals. That was
Yeah.
something that was I think it was made for Flatpak, but it's not just a Flatpak thing. It's not just a GTK thing. It works on KDE snaps. It
Right.
works everywhere where the design of an app needs to get explicit permission to use this hardware device, or you need to opt into saying, yes, this app can actually access this directory or this file.
Yeah, that's a feature of iOS and macOS that I truly absolutely love. Things don't automatically have access to the stuff on your desktop. That's
Right.
amazing. Let me have that.
Just because I trusted the developer enough to download their app doesn't mean I trust them with full access to everything
Exactly.
on my computer. So
Exactly.
yeah, it's cool seeing that, even though Snap versus Flatpak, they're competing, we're also working together, right?
Mhm.
We're working together on these portals, and so Snap uses portals and Flatpak uses portals, and I think there's ways you can. I always like to use the term cooperation. So it's
Hey,
Yeah,
you
I
can
like
that's a
you can
that.
good word.
cooperate and compete at the same time, and I think that's when some of these technologies can be at their healthiest, is when you have that cooperation of we're all we think we're the best, so we're all fighting each other, but we're also at the same conferences in the same rooms hacking on the same code together because we're
Yep.
friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The real key is to not trip each other up. Help where it's needed, but don't actively trip each other up.
No,
Sure, yeah.
push each other forward. Yeah.
I absolutely enjoyed the conversation. I could probably just sit here and keep probing and
Yeah,
listening
for hours.
forever.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me. If you guys want me back at some point, let me know. If maybe when 5.1 or 6 OS 6 drops, love to come on and talk.
Yeah, we'd
All
love
right.
to have you again. That would be great.
Great.